Royal Guard Nathaniel Harrow began his dawn patrol with a steady, grounded rhythm inherited from 3 generations of Harrow men before him. His boots pressed into the gravel path along Windsor's Long Walk, each step echoing the calm authority expected of those who guarded the youngest royals. The rising sun spread thin gold light across the wet stones, and the palace grounds shimmered with the soft quiet of early morning routine. Nathaniel inhaled deeply, catching the familiar sense of dew, polished leather, and the faint lavender carried from the upper windows. Everything appeared peaceful, yet beneath the calm, a subtle unease tugged gently at his instincts, urging him to pay closer attention than usual. He paused near the stone archway framing the east courtyard, where the children's transport vehicles were lined with precise symmetry. Drivers moved briskly between them, checking seatbelts, adjusting mirrors, and loading school materials with routine confidence. Nathaniel studied each movement, scanning for anything out of place, though nothing appeared unusual. Still, the uneasy sensation beneath his ribs refused to settle, drifting like a low fog around the edges of his awareness. This feeling had warned him before, once during an unexpected visitor breach, another during an anonymous delivery incident, and each time it had proven justified. He straightened slightly, letting his senses sharpen around the steady hum of morning activity. The palace was waking. Footsteps echoed along the adjacent walkway, where tutors crossed with books tucked under their arms and maids carried laundry baskets toward the service quarters. A pair of groundkeepers exchanged quiet greetings as they inspected the lawn. Even the royal corgis made their presence known, weaving between staff as handlers tried to maintain control. Nathaniel observed everything with practiced precision, noting each voice, each gesture, each shadow cast along the stone walls. But his attention drifted repeatedly toward the second-floor windows of the children's wing, specifically the one belonging to Princess Charlotte's prep room. Its curtains, usually parted neatly to allow morning sun, hung slightly uneven as though someone had moved them recently. Nathaniel stepped closer to get a better angle. His eyes narrowed when the curtain shifted the smallest amount, just enough to suggest movement behind the glass. The shift was quick, hesitant, but intentional. He waited, breath held for a moment, watching the soft fabric settle. A few seconds later, the curtain fluttered again, 2 quick motions followed by one slower. A rhythmic pattern, not the casual tug of a breeze or a child's random fidgeting. Nathaniel's pulse tightened as awareness struck him. That was deliberate, a signal, and not one he recognized from the standard set of silent alerts the royal children had been subtly taught. Before he could process it fully, a voice called his name from behind. Nathaniel turned to see Senior Guard Davis approaching with his usual clipboard and measured stride. Davis greeted him with an easy familiarity, asking if the courtyard was clear and reminding him that the children would be brought down for their school run shortly. Nathaniel answered with disciplined composure, though his mind still circled the strange curtain pattern. He asked if there had been any last-minute changes to the escort list, especially regarding who might be entering or exiting the children's wing. Davis shook his head, dismissing the concern with a wave of his hand and a casual remark about kids moving around before lessons. But Nathaniel's instincts resisted the dismissal. A patterned signal was not something Charlotte would make without intention. Once Davis left, Nathaniel looked back up at the same window, and his breath tightened when Princess Charlotte's face appeared. Only for a heartbeat, but unmistakable. Her expression was not curious or playful. It was tense, serious, and alert in a way no 7-year-old should ever look. She lifted one hand toward the glass, moving her fingers in a small, precise pattern. 2 short downward motions, 1 long sideways stroke. It was not random. It carried the unmistakable structure of a coded gesture. Charlotte held his gaze for a split second more before pulling the curtain fully closed. Nathaniel's heart thudded as realization anchored itself firmly. She was signaling him. Something was wrong in that room. He scanned the courtyard quickly, noting the relaxed faces of drivers and staff, all unaware of the silent message sent from above. Everything appeared normal, but the stillness around him felt deceptive, almost staged. He took 1 step forward, then another, his instincts bracing for something his eyes could not yet see. The radio on his shoulder crackled. Harrow, escort formation at the entrance. Children coming down shortly. Stand ready. He acknowledged the order, but his attention remained fixed on the second-floor window, where Charlotte had just vanished behind the curtain. She was not a child who panicked easily. She was observant, grounded, and remarkably steady under pressure. If she had given a silent signal, she must have felt genuinely unsafe. At that exact moment, movement at the far end of the courtyard caught his eye. A familiar figure emerged from the walkway, gliding with calculated elegance, her blue coat trailing softly behind her. Queen Consort Camilla, unannounced, unexpected, moving with surprising purpose toward the very corridor leading to the children's prep room. Nathaniel stiffened instantly. Camilla almost never involved herself directly in school routines, especially without prior notice. Her sudden appearance, combined with Charlotte's desperate signal, formed a chilling alignment Nathaniel couldn't ignore. He watched her cross the courtyard with a composed, almost stern expression, her gaze cutting toward the children's wing as though she knew exactly where she was headed. Nathaniel instinctively shifted forward, his frame straightening, his senses heightening with immediate urgency. He could not yet understand the full scope of what was unfolding, but he knew with absolute certainty that the princess's signal had been a plea and that Camilla's presence was no coincidence. Davis approached again, placing a hand on Nathaniel's arm to steady him. "Easy," he murmured. "She's probably offering a good morning. Nothing more." But Nathaniel didn't move. Every muscle in his body told him that something unseen, something dangerously close, was already unraveling inside those walls. Camilla entered the children's corridor without waiting for an escort, vanishing behind the ornate door as though she had jurisdiction over every inch of the space. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Protocol was being ignored. Timing was too perfect, and Charlotte's signal still echoed in his mind, like a silent alarm. He started walking toward the entrance, controlled but purposeful, refusing to let the moment slip by unchecked. The palace might still appear calm, but a current of danger had already awakened beneath its polished surface. And Nathaniel Harrow, sworn protector of the young royals, would not ignore the silent cry of a child who trusted him to see what others overlooked. Nathaniel entered the east corridor with a calm, deliberate stride that belied the fire tightening in his chest. The polished floors reflected slivers of morning light, stretching across the walls in uneven patterns, as staff moved briskly around their tasks. A pair of footmen carried trays of neatly packed lunches toward the service lift, pausing only long enough to greet him with polite nods. But Nathaniel barely registered them. His eyes were locked on the staircase leading to the children's prep room. Every instinct told him that Princess Charlotte's signal had not been an accident. It was purposeful, measured, and delivered with the kind of urgency a child could only summon when she felt unsafe. And Camilla's unexpected arrival moments later had only deepened his concern, threading tension through the air like a taut wire waiting to snap. He climbed the stairs with careful pace, keeping his breath quiet so he could listen for anything out of place. The upper corridor was typically filled with soft chatter governesses, discussing schedules, tutors moving between rooms, the muffled laughter of children preparing for their day. But now the hallway felt unusually still, as though the palace itself had grown cautious. A faint sound reached him, something between a shuffle and a hurried whisper, coming from behind the prep room door. Nathaniel paused, his hand hovering near the handle, listening. He caught a brief fragment of a voice higher-pitched, hurried. Then another, lower, sharper, carrying the edge of authority. He didn't move yet. Instead, he stepped closer to the wall, angling himself slightly so he could distinguish tone from emotion. Something was wrong. He could feel it. The door opened a moment later, but not from the inside. Instead, Charlotte's young governess, Miss Radley, hurried out with her face pale and tense. She nearly collided with Nathaniel before stopping abruptly. "Oh, Guard Harrow, I didn't expect," her voice faltered. She clutched a set of lesson folders against her chest, her knuckles white from strain. Nathaniel studied her expression carefully. Miss Radley was usually composed, always perfectly organized, but this morning she looked rattled, as though she had been scolded or pressured into something she didn't agree with. "Is everything all right in there?" Nathaniel asked, lowering his tone to avoid startling her. Miss Radley hesitated, darting a quick glance back toward the door. I'm not certain. There have been some changes I wasn't informed about." Her words were quiet, almost guarded, as though she feared being overheard. Nathaniel took a step closer. "Princess Charlotte signaled from the window," he said softly. A distress signal. Miss Radley's breath caught. For a moment, she looked as though she might deny it, but her lips pressed together in a thin, anxious line. She looked uneasy, the governess admitted, and Queen Consort Camilla arrived unexpectedly. She asked to speak with Charlotte alone before the children were taken down to the car. Nathaniel felt the tension coil tighter inside him. Alone? He repeated. Was anyone else present? Miss Radley shook her head. No, she dismissed me. She said she needed a moment with the princess, and that it was a matter of proper positioning for the school's upcoming engagements. The phrase made Nathaniel's jaw clench. Proper positioning sounded like the kind of strategic wording Camilla used when discussing hierarchy or adjusting public appearances. But what unsettled him more was the governess's final glance toward the door. It wasn't the look of someone who trusted what was happening. It was the look of someone who sensed something she couldn't intervene in. Nathaniel nodded his thanks and watched her hurry down the corridor, her shoulders tense. When she disappeared around the corner, he turned back to the prep room door. He lifted his hand to knock, then stopped when he heard a small, choked sound, soft but unmistakable. A child's breath, catching. Not crying, not yet, but on the edge of distress. He knocked twice, firm but respectful. The murmured voices inside fell silent instantly. After a few seconds that stretched too long, the door cracked open. Camilla stood in the frame, dressed impeccably, her expression composed but thinly veiled with irritation. "God Harrow," she said, her tone cool, almost dismissive. "Is there a reason you are interrupting a private conversation?" Nathaniel straightened without retreating. "Ma'am," Princess Charlotte signaled from the window, a signal indicating discomfort. Camilla's eyes darkened slightly, as though she had not expected him to address the issue so directly. "Nonsense," she replied. "Children fidget. You guards overinterpret everything." Nathaniel held her gaze respectfully but unyieldingly. "With respect, ma'am, the signals exist for a reason, and Princess Charlotte is familiar with their use." Camilla's lips pressed together tightly. For a moment, her expression flickered between annoyance and calculation. "The matter is being handled," she said curtly. "We were discussing her upcoming role in the school's spring ceremony, and she needed guidance on what is expected of her." The explanation was too vague, too rehearsed. Nathaniel shifted slightly, tilting his head enough to glance past Camilla's shoulder. Charlotte stood near the small table inside, her posture stiff, her eyes wide and unsettled. She looked directly at him, no hesitation this time, and subtly tapped her fingers twice against her skirt. It was the same signal, and the meaning was clear. Nathaniel's chest tightened. "Ma'am," he said, his voice controlled but firmer now, "I must request permission to escort the princess to the courtyard. The schedule indicates the children should already be preparing for departure." Camilla exhaled sharply, irritation spilling into her tone. "Control yourself, Guard Harrow. You are not in charge of the children's daily routines." Her voice lifted slightly, enough that Charlotte flinched. Nathaniel saw it. He also saw the way Camilla stepped subtly between him and the princess, blocking his line of sight. It was a protective gesture, not for the child, but for her control of the situation. Before Nathaniel could respond, another voice echoed down the hallway. "Is there a delay?" It was Prince William's private secretary, Mr. Gray, walking briskly toward them with a stack of briefings in hand. Camilla stiffened visibly. Nathaniel recognized her reaction instantly, the slight tightening of her shoulders, the faint lift of her chin. She did not want William's office involved. "No delay," Camilla said quickly. "Just addressing a behavioral hesitation." But Mr. Gray glanced at Charlotte, at Nathaniel, then back at Camilla. His brow furrowed. "The princess looks distressed," he said quietly. For the first time, Camilla's composure cracked just slightly, just enough for Nathaniel to see the frustration beneath the surface. "Children are dramatic," she muttered. "She'll adjust." Charlotte's breath hitched. Nathaniel took one step forward, placing himself directly between Charlotte and the rising tension in the room. "Princess," he said softly, "are you ready for school?" She nodded immediately, almost desperately, her small hand reaching slightly toward him before she pulled it back. Mr. Gray caught the gesture. "Guard Harrow," he said. "Escort her. Now." Camilla's eyes flashed with anger, but the order had been given. A royal staff command carried authority even over her. Nathaniel stepped past Camilla and offered Charlotte his hand. She took it without hesitation, her fingers trembling as she gripped his. As he guided her out of the room, he glanced back and saw Camilla's expression cold, sharp, and full of something that looked very much like warning. Whatever had been happening behind that door was not over, and Nathaniel knew the real confrontation was only just beginning. Nathaniel guided Princess Charlotte down the corridor with steady, measured steps, but his senses remained sharply attuned to everything behind them. The soft squeak of her polished shoes, the faint tremble in her grip, and the echo of Camilla's heavy footsteps somewhere in the distance formed a tense rhythm that tightened the air around them. Charlotte walked close to his side, head slightly lowered, as though afraid someone might call her back at any moment. Nathaniel kept his posture tall, deliberately calm, offering her a quiet barrier of safety as they moved farther from the prep room where the tension had begun to unravel. The moment they reached the first landing, Charlotte looked up at him with wide, unsettled eyes. "Is she angry?" she whispered, her small voice barely reaching above the hush of the hallway. Nathaniel slowed his pace so he could kneel at her level. "Not with you, Princess," he said gently, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes adults disagree about what's best, but you did the right thing by signaling." Charlotte blinked, uncertainty flickering across her features, as though she had never expected to be believed so quickly. He saw the mixture of courage and fear in her expression, the same blend he had once seen in young William decades earlier in photos and stories passed through the guard. "I only wanted William," she murmured. "She said I wouldn't be going to school today." Nathaniel felt the weight of her confession settle heavily. He straightened slowly, using his body to shield her from the long stretch of corridor ahead. "Who told you that?" he asked quietly. Charlotte hesitated before answering, glancing over her shoulder, as if someone might emerge from the shadows. "Camilla said she had spoken to the headmistress and arranged something new," she murmured. "She said I needed special guidance, and that my place at the school was not yet secure." Nathaniel's jaw tightened, despite his effort to remain composed. Threatening a child's schooling, especially when that child was already under public scrutiny, was not a casual remark. It was leverage, a message, and Charlotte had felt the weight of it enough to use a distress signal. They reached the central staircase, where morning light pooled through the tall windows. Nathaniel paused, using the brightness to search for anyone lurking nearby. The palace staff moved hurriedly around the landing, but no one approached them. Charlotte clutched the railing, her fingers trembling slightly, and Nathaniel realized she was frightened, not of school, but of returning to that closed room where Camilla's voice had pressed in on her. He gestured toward the hallway leading to the courtyard. "This way, Princess." She nodded, but before they could take 2 steps, the sharp click of heels echoed from behind them. They turned to see Camilla approaching, her expression strained but controlled, like someone carefully maintaining a mask. "There you are," Camilla said, her tone soft but lined with irritation. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Charlotte and I were having a perfectly civil conversation before you intervened, Guard Harrow." Nathaniel placed himself subtly between Camilla and the child, ensuring Charlotte remained partially shielded. "Princess Charlotte's schedule requires prompt departure," he replied calmly. "Mr. Gray has ordered that she be escorted." Camilla's eyes flicked from him to Charlotte, then back again, assessing the situation with cold calculation. "Mr. Gray is not her parent," she said sharply. "And I, unlike some, am responsible for ensuring she is properly prepared for her role." Charlotte's breath hitched again, and Nathaniel felt her grip tighten around his coat sleeve. "I was only meant to go to school," she whispered, though her words trembled just enough for Camilla to catch them. The queen consort's gaze sharpened, a flash of annoyance crossing her features before she smoothed them into a gentle, condescending smile. "My dear, sometimes you must listen to those who understand the bigger picture," she said. "Your presence at the school must reflect the dignity of your future responsibilities. That requires more than simply showing up." Nathaniel kept his expression composed, but his mind worked quickly. Camilla wasn't simply interfering. She was asserting authority where she had none, using Charlotte's vulnerability as a foothold. He leaned slightly toward Charlotte. "You are safe," he murmured, barely above a breath. Then, more firmly, he addressed Camilla. "Ma'am, the princess has been cleared for departure today. If there are concerns, they should be addressed with the Prince of Wales." Camilla's expression hardened at that. "William," she said slowly, "has many responsibilities. It is often necessary for someone else to step in when he is preoccupied." Charlotte looked up quickly, something like fear sparking behind her eyes. "I want my father," she whispered. Camilla's lips pressed into a thin line. "Charlotte, you are behaving impulsively. We were discussing adjustments that will help you succeed." Nathaniel stepped forward before she could move any closer. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "the princess has requested her father. I must prioritize her emotional safety." Camilla's eyes widened, stunned that a guard would dare cite such reasoning in her presence. But Nathaniel held her gaze, unmoving, unshaken. The corridor fell silent for a long, breathless moment. Movement flickered at the far end of the hallway as Mr. Gray returned, this time accompanied by Princess Anne. Her stride was brisk, purposeful, and her expression sharpened the moment she saw Camilla and Charlotte standing in tension. "What is happening here?" Anne asked, her voice firm enough to pull the entire hallway to stillness. Camilla shifted immediately. "Just clarifying some confusion," she said coolly. "Charlotte was overwhelmed, and I insisted on speaking with her privately." Anne's gaze slid to Charlotte, then to Nathaniel, then back to Camilla. "Overwhelmed?" Anne repeated. "She looks frightened, not overwhelmed. There's a difference." Charlotte stepped slightly closer to Nathaniel, almost instinctively. That small motion told Anne everything. Without hesitation, she knelt before the child, her voice softening in a way few ever heard. "Did someone upset you?" she asked. Charlotte didn't speak. She simply nodded once, very small, very quietly. Anne's jaw tightened, and she stood with renewed authority. "Guard Harrow, take her to the courtyard," she said. "Now, inform William directly." Camilla took a sudden step forward. "You do not have the right to—" "I have every right," Anne cut in sharply. "And you will not interfere with this child again without his consent." Nathaniel didn't wait. He lifted Charlotte gently, her arms wrapping quickly around his shoulders, her cheek pressing against his uniform. As he moved down the corridor, he heard Camilla and Anne's voices rising behind him, sharp and escalating. But Charlotte didn't look back. Her breath steadied slowly, her grip tightening only when they reached the polished archway leading to the open air. Something deeper was unfolding behind those walls, something deliberate, strategic, and aimed directly at a child's sense of belonging. And Nathaniel knew that William's reaction, once he learned the truth, would turn the palace on its axis. The real storm had only just begun, and its center was closing in fast. The morning light outside the palace courtyard was brighter now, almost cruel in its clarity, as Nathaniel carried Princess Charlotte toward the waiting vehicle. Each step felt heavy with unspoken tension, the soft crunch of gravel under his boots punctuating the silence around them. Charlotte clung to him tightly, small arms wrapped around his neck, seeking the security only he could offer in this moment. Her wide eyes flicked constantly toward the palace, as though expecting Camilla to appear again at any second. Nathaniel kept his pace steady, his expression deliberately calm, though beneath it, his mind raced through every possible contingency. The child's safety was his priority, and nothing else. No protocol, no politeness, no royal hierarchy would come before that. The moment they reached the motor court, the black school vehicle waited, its doors open and engine humming softly. Nathaniel placed Charlotte gently on the rear seat, checking the straps of her small car harness to ensure they were secure. She sank into the seat with a sigh of relief, her hands lingering on his glove for a heartbeat longer than necessary. He knelt to meet her gaze. "You did the right thing," he whispered, the words firm yet comforting. Charlotte's lips trembled into a small, almost imperceptible smile, her hands flexing as if she were trying to summon courage from them. She nodded, a small, determined motion, then pressed her tiny hand into the air and executed a discrete pattern of movements. One of the secret hand signals Nathaniel had been trained to recognize as a plea for immediate intervention. Nathaniel's stomach dropped. The signal confirmed it. Charlotte had been in danger inside the palace, and the person she had feared was the queen consort herself. He glanced around the courtyard, noting the slight tension in the air among the staff. Drivers and footmen moved as though aware that something had transpired, but unwilling or untrained to intervene. Nathaniel's jaw clenched. Protocol demanded caution. Yes, But instinct demanded action. He would not leave a child vulnerable for the sake of decorum, and no royal figure, regardless of rank, would override his duty to protect her. Camilla appeared at the far edge of the courtyard, her posture perfect, her expression carefully measured. But Nathaniel saw the subtle signs beneath the polished exterior, the flick of her fingers, the tightening of her jaw, the sharpness of her gaze as she took in Charlotte in the vehicle. Nathaniel stepped fully into her line of sight, planting himself between the vehicle and her approach. "Princess Charlotte has been cleared for departure," he said, voice steady and commanding. "She is to be escorted to school without further delay." Camilla's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, her composure faltered. Nathaniel had seen it, a flash of frustration, of irritation, of something colder beneath. He ignored the silent threat radiating from her and focused on the child. Charlotte shifted slightly in her seat, looking at Nathaniel, then at Camilla. She did not speak, but her small, firm hand rested on his glove. Nathaniel understood instantly. Her trust rested entirely on him. Any hesitation now could endanger her, and he refused to allow that. With a deliberate motion, he opened the passenger door and gestured toward the driver. "Take us to school, immediately, and maintain full discretion," he instructed. The driver nodded quickly, glancing nervously at Camilla, whose eyes remained fixed on the vehicle. Nathaniel closed the door after Charlotte, planting himself beside it, a living shield between the child and any further interference. Camilla's expression tightened further, but she did not move closer. For now, her authority ended at the courtyard boundary. The car rolled slowly out of the palace gates, and the tension inside the vehicle eased fractionally as Charlotte exhaled, small shoulders relaxing just enough to suggest relief. Nathaniel glanced in the rearview mirror, keeping her visible while scanning the road ahead. The signal Charlotte had given earlier, the tiny hand pattern pressed against the glass, replayed vividly in his mind. It was a silent plea that had gone unrecognized by all but him, and it had led directly to intervention before any harm could occur. He squeezed her hand gently. "You were very brave, ma'am," he said softly. Charlotte's small voice answered almost immediately, tinged with both fear and resolve. "I didn't want her to take me." Nathaniel's gaze shifted forward as he considered the consequences of what had transpired. Camilla's attempt to remove Charlotte from school, to assert her will over the princess's schedule and safety, was not merely overreach, it was deliberate manipulation. The signal had revealed the depth of Charlotte's concern, and it had forced Nathaniel into a delicate position: protect the child without causing public scandal, navigate the protocols of the palace, and maintain authority in a hierarchy that often resisted the instincts of the guards. Every muscle in his body remained taut. He would not allow Charlotte to be threatened again, and he knew that Camilla's next move would likely be calculated, cold, and swift. By the time the car turned onto the school grounds, the sun had climbed higher, casting sharp, long shadows across the familiar courtyard. The headmistress and a few senior staff were waiting, their expressions a mixture of surprise and concern as they observed the vehicle approach. Nathaniel did not wait for them to react. He opened the rear door, crouched low, and assisted Charlotte as she stepped out. Her small hand gripped his tightly once more, grounding her as they moved toward the entrance. Staff murmured their greetings, but Nathaniel's attention remained wholly on the princess. She walked beside him with the poise she had been taught, but her eyes still flicked toward the palace, wary of unseen threats. Once inside, Charlotte was escorted to her private classroom, where she finally allowed herself to sink into a chair. Nathaniel stood a few steps away, arms crossed, listening as the headmistress approached. The woman's expression was a mixture of relief and astonishment. "Was she frightened?" she asked quietly. Nathaniel nodded. "Yes, but she used a signal, a silent hand gesture to indicate distress before anyone else noticed. That's how we intervened in time." The headmistress's eyes widened. "Remarkable and alarming. It could have gone very differently." Nathaniel's gaze turned toward the small window that overlooked the courtyard. Camilla's distant figure could just be seen beyond the palace gates, still observing, still calculating. His jaw tightened. The confrontation was not over. Minutes later, a discreet knock sounded at the classroom door. Nathaniel opened it to find Prince William standing there, expression tense but controlled. Charlotte's face lit up at the sight of her father, and she ran to him, the fear in her eyes giving way to relief. William bent down, wrapping his arms around her, and whispered something Nathaniel couldn't hear. But the way Charlotte clung to him told Nathaniel everything. She felt safe now. William straightened, his eyes narrowing as they fell on Nathaniel. "You acted decisively," he said, "and you protected her when it mattered." "I am grateful." Nathaniel inclined his head. "Always, Your Highness. My duty is to ensure her safety first." As William guided Charlotte toward a quieter part of the building for her lessons, Nathaniel's mind returned to Camilla. Her influence had been checked, for now, but the undercurrents of control and manipulation would not disappear so easily. This incident was only the beginning of a delicate struggle between authority, loyalty, and the protection of the innocent. The hand signal, the quiet plea Charlotte had used to summon help, had revealed truths about vulnerability and vigilance that could not be ignored. Nathaniel knew he would remain alert, ready for the next move, because in a palace where every gesture carried weight, even the smallest child's signal could ignite the largest storm. And as the school bell chimed softly in the distance, marking the start of lessons, Nathaniel remained at the door, watchful. He understood fully now that Princess Charlotte had not only given a secret signal but had also entrusted him with a responsibility that transcended the ordinary. Her courage had forced action, revealed deceit, and reinforced a truth every guardian knew in the heart of the palace. No protocol outweighed the safety of the young, and no authority could compromise it without consequence. Nathaniel stood tall, unwavering, knowing that the next steps would test the palace's power structures, and that Camilla, no doubt, would not yield quietly.